me. Okay, if I start talking, can you hear me online? I need someone to just kind of give me a thumbs up.
You're good.
Thank you. All right, that's working. We're going to minimize that. Side. Do they have, is your name on the slide or? But it doesn't matter.
No.
Okay. All right, so it is, according to my watch, 10 after, which means we've got an hour and 50 minutes to get through all of this fun material. So we're just going to get going. Obviously, we love feedback and lively debates, but just realize 3 o'clock, we're done. So we can have those debates. Again, thank you. Welcome back. It was working. There you go. Okay, just quick look at the agenda. So we're going to do child nutrition, new exit codes for international baccalaureates, the special education updates, alternative diploma review, review of the GQ code, review of hospital, homebound, and institutionalized incident data, and SOEP. There you go.
Right.
He's excited for that. All right. By the way, the camera does work, so it will just point at you.
Okay, that works.
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Loveland. I'm filling in for Tammy Walker today. So I'm speaking on child nutrition updates for you. Side note, my brother works in IT and data at another school district out of Utah, and I hear all the the back and forth. So you guys have a big job to do and a lot of information today. So hopefully the next few minutes is informative and just gives you what you need if you're helping your school food service with some upcoming programming data requests. So we worked with our state contractor for our CMP web software, who is Link, and they created a direct certification API for us. So right now in our CMP web system, the users have to go in, they log in, they go into the direct certification module, they download exact matches of kids that match from the UTREX data that you submit to the files that we get from DWS, DHS, state foster, with Medicaid as well. So that's we do some matching on our side, but this will enable you to set up that API with the software systems to automatically download those exact matches from our CMP web system, bring that over to your school food service eligibility software system, do an upload into that, update eligibility, done. Possible matches will still need to be done through CMP web. Yes. We just notified food service directors last month that it is now available.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Is this now available? Is the API available now? Yes, it is. So we have a terms of use document that we sent out to our food service directors for a couple of signatures. Again, just reiterating data confidentiality. That's once we receive that back, then we can start having those conversations about the scope of work, what that looks like. Tammy Walker in our office will be the one that sets up that bearer token and all of that fun stuff. So that's ready to rock and roll. We're excited. We hope that it helps get students benefits quicker and the right benefits. So right now we're CMP web for this last school year, we had over 60,000 kids come through direct certification. The food service directors reported back about 40,000 matches. So we're missing about 20,000 some kids. So hopefully this will tighten it up a little bit. That is our end goal. I guess I talked through our objectives. So benefits of this with some of these bullet points is supposed to help save time, right? It's an automatic process. It's happening on the back end. Again, we're trying to increase participation and get the students benefits they need. Hopefully, once they are directly certified, those households do not need to submit a free reduced price application. And they're also taken out of a verification pool that the food service department has to do. They usually have to review 3% of household applications that they receive to verify that that is correct. So there are some benefits with this. Again, with the API, any possible matches. So exact match would be first name, last name, and date of birth. That's a pretty standard exact match. The possible matches, we have a pretty sophisticated algorithm in CMP Web to match up kids that way. That will still have to be done manually. So if you are the lucky person that gets to work with your food service program or food service software, again, we just encourage you to start those conversations on what that looks like, what your contracts look like. If this is something that you can build into your current enhancement requests, or if this needs to be something outside of that. You might also want to pair up with other LEs that have the same software systems so that you guys can have those joint conversations to see what works for you. As that scope of work is built, we highly recommend that there be an output file of some type with a summary of how many files were received through that API, how many students were uploaded into the food service system. If there were any errors, that would just be a good edit check to have in place. So again, once you guys are ready to move forward, Tammy Walker will be your contact. We've got reference materials and things like that that she will send to you. She'll work with you on the API key and bearer token and instructions. We did set it up so every July 1, that API key must be renewed. So just so you're aware of that. And there's Tammy's contact information if you need to get a hold of her. I believe all these slides are available as well. Okay, perfect. All right, pandemic EBT. So the public health emergency is scheduled to end May 11th, 2023. So with that, USDA provides states some, oh, there we go. Oh, you have questions that come through, okay.
Questions or comments?
Okay, it is our current understanding that districts must first request account setup and permissions from the state. Vendors cannot set up anything prior to a customer having this permission. Is this still correct?
So we will work directly with the school food service director and then whoever their IT contact is at the LEA. So that will be our communication. If you want to set up a meeting with our office with your third-party contractor, we can do that too to help with communication. To answer the question. Okay, great, thanks. Were there any other questions? All right. We're trying to stay up with technology, but there's a lot out there. Okay, so back to 2023 summer pandemic EBT. This will be hopefully the last year that we have pandemic EBT due to the public health emergency ending May 11th. So USDA did afford states to not do a school year plan. We didn't have any schools in Utah that closed due to the pandemic this year, so we decided to opt out of the school year plan. So that's one less thing we have to work through. We were approved for a summer PBT plan. So in our state plan, we specified eligibility. Students have to be enrolled on May 1st. So it's like a snapshot, right? They have to be enrolled as of May 1st. And their free reduced price eligibility has to be reflective of May 1st as well. So that's coming up here pretty quick. They did change the issuance amount from, I think, $340 to $120 for the summer per child that's eligible. Some of you might have schools that are community eligibility provision or provision 2, which means they don't collect free reduced price applications. All the kids eat at no charge. So every single child in those schools will be reported as eligible for pandemic EBT. So again, we're not collecting attendance, absences, we're not collecting days school were closed. We will also exclude any virtual only students. They will not be included, and homeschool students, which that was going to be a problem if we had to do that, but we don't. So we're good there. Also different this year is we do not have to track any newly eligible free reduced students. So May 1st is the cutoff on that question.
So does our food service department? Oh,
Sorry.
no.
It's your room.
So our food service department has already contacted me about the file that we'll need to create or help them create and so forth relative to this. So from what you just said, do you want us to exclude those students who are online, or is that something you will exclude from the data that we send?
We would prefer that if you can exclude that to exclude it, but the site number will be associated with that student. So Tammy and Kim in our office can exclude those if they need to, but it's preferred that they are excluded. Yes.
So on the question of virtual students, we have 3 virtual schools. At 2 of them, those students can opt to take a number of classes in person back at the Boundary High School. Do we? So I mean, we have to figure out which students are not taking any in-person classes, even though they're enrolled at the, or is it just if they're enrolled in the online school, even if they have 1 or 2 online classes, then we, yeah, I guess what situation with them?
So again, this is for students that would normally have access to school meals. So 100% virtual, they wouldn't have access to school meals. If you have kids that are attending classes at brick and mortar schools, go ahead and include them. If they're like a hybrid or a dual learning, does that answer your question? We're not breaking it down by class.
If they take a 7th period class, the last class of the day in person.
That's true.
We need to track that detail. So, like, if a student okay, at our virtual high school, they have 7 classes. They take 6 of them virtually and 1 of them in person. If that in-person class happens to be at the same time lunch is offered, then they have access to school lunch. If it's at the end of the day, they don't have access to school lunch. So do we need to worry about that level of detail?
I wouldn't stress about that. Just if they are taking some classes in person at a National School Lunch Program school, just go ahead and put them on the file.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's a lot. Okay, so here is our timeline. Again, that May 1st date is really important for households to understand. We are encouraging food service directors to go into that CMP web system and directly certify as many kids as they can at this point in time. Tammy Walker and Kim Buser in our office will start sending out move-it packages with the template and instructions for reporting that back to us. We will ask for that file May 12th. And that is a firm deadline for that file. If you use the Aspire system, you can start requesting those files starting May 2nd. So they're ready and you just need to, or earlier. And then you just need to submit an Aspire ticket for that. We should be good to go. So that gives 2 people on our staff a couple of weeks to go through everybody's files, do some data scrubbing and all that fun stuff, and then get it to DWS the first part of June. And then that first round of benefits will be issued out in mid-July. So that's the first part that we're looking at there. And then households do have until August 16th to report any missing students. So the food service directors will be working on that, and they'll want to submit a file of those missed students to our office by August 18th. And we have to close up shop September 30th. So that's kind of why we're sticking to these deadlines. The funding period is on a federal year, so that's what everything ends. Yes.
So a question that might lead to another question. So you said this is the last year for the pandemic EBT, but there is an ongoing EBT after that.
Yeah.
it seems like most of this data we're already submitting to USBE. Is there ever a time where this will just all be handled in-house at USBE between
Yep,
the various departments?
that's the goal.
Okay,
And that's kind of why Cliff mentioned the mailing addresses and the U-Trex. So if we can get it through that submission, we would love that. Just have that be part of that. So great thought to move us forward. Appreciate that. Let's see, again, this is just more details about the round one data collection. And that you can contact Aspire if you would like them to pull that report for you. Just a side note for this too, families can have till May 1st to apply for reduced price benefits, but then the food service department needs time to go through and approve and process those applications. So we recommend pulling enrollment and free reduced eligibility on May 1st, and then maybe pulling another report, you know, before the May 12th deadline to see if there were any changes with student eligibility, or I'm not sure how your systems work when kids unenroll and enroll, if there's a delay there or any of that, but we just want to capture as many kids as we can. The template, there's a link for you to reference that, plus it'll be sent out in the Move It packets. Tammy would very much appreciate if you excluded any students with free reduced price eligibility dates after May 1st, or if they exited, you know, they have to be enrolled May 1st, and then please exclude any paid or denied eligible students unless you are provision 2 or CEP schools. That just makes her life a whole lot easier managing all these files that are coming in. Again, we'll ask for the second data collection for any missed students by August 18th. For more information on the pandemic EBT program, Department of Workforce Services has the public facing webpage with information. They will also be posting a list of all of the National School Lunch participating schools and a list of all the schools that reported for pandemic EBT so that households can know. And then also we have a Canvas course with the timeline templates, copy of our state plan of resources if you need to reference any of those materials. Okay, questions on this summer pandemic EBT? Okay, well, you know who to contact if you have questions. Summer EBT, so Congress did authorize a permanent summer EBT program starting summer of 2024, and that will be under the National School Lunch Act. Sounds like we're gonna have to go to the board to get approval on that and work through that process. USDA has until December to get regulation out to states. So that's kind of time we're looking for, but with it being permanent, we are looking at ways to streamline that data request. So we won't know exactly what that looks like for a few more months. Again, these are your contacts for any summer EBT. I believe that's all we've got, unless we've got some more questions. All right, sweet. Well, thanks for letting us come share our updates with you. Appreciate it.
Hi, so I am covering this item. She's not able to come today. There's a new exit code for International Baccalaureate Diploma. So the new exit code is IB, and it'll be a code that's active starting in the 2024 school year, and it's for students who graduate with the International Baccalaureate Diploma. You should exit them with the IB exit code accompanied by a high school completion status code of GA, GR, GQ, or GM. And the reason for this new code is in order to track this for legislative fundings, legislative changes to IB funding and reporting requirements. Similar to the competency-based learning exit code, CB, the IB code can only be used if the school is listed in Cactus as having an IB diploma program. And any questions about this, can be directed to Christy Schreck. Okay, and then for my part, I have a review of special ed updates that I've given throughout this school year. There may be one or two items that are new, but mostly this is a review.
We have a question. Wait, just a second.
Sure.
Malia, do you know if the specifications are out in the UTREX document on that new code? So that we can make sure that we get that information to our software vendors.
I'm Callista might actually know the answer to that.
So it is not currently in there, but Kristen and I are working with Melissa to get that update before the new school year. So hopefully between now and the end of July.
So this is an exit code, not a hyper completion test, right? So that means in the past, when we've submitted seniors with no exit date at the end of the school year, along with every other student in the school year, for these students, we're gonna have to start exiting them. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, so think of this as a value added piece of information, similar to any of the early graduate codes and the competency based code. So for the high school completion status, we still need to know if they're a graduate, what and which type of graduate code, whether it's a GR or a GQ. And I can't think of any reasons why you wouldn't also be able to award this to GM. But anyway, so adding the IB exit code lets us know that these are students that should be included in the reporting that's now required for International Baccalaureate, and then also for the additional funding. Did that answer the question?
He's shaking his head, yes. Oh,
Okay, great,
you.
thanks.
I don't see any other questions. Anyone? Okay. All right.
Okay, so back to my special ed updates. So the first one we had this year was a change to the special ed rules regarding developmental delay disability type. And this went into effect in mid-January. And now eligibility teams can determine a student eligible under developmental delay through age 8. So along with that update, we updated the S2 603 UTREX validation, which is a fatal error. And we changed it so that it starts triggering on the student's 9th birthday rather than on their 8th birthday. So if you're getting this validation error, the way to resolve it is to close the SCRAM record that has disability type of DD on the last day the student was 8. And then that record will be able to start coming into UTREX without the fatal error. Then you'll start a new record for the student starting on their 9th birthday with the new disability type. And then here's a link to a copy of the updated special education rules if you want to peruse that for yourself. Okay, and then the next big update was, of course, the addition to the student membership eligibility in Board Rule R277419. And I've covered this a couple times now, so most of you are probably pretty familiar with this. So basically, previously we had continuing membership eligibility whereby after 10 days of unexcused absences, you have to exit a student. So now there's this new section where if you have a student with an IEP who has those 10 days of unexcused absences, you can actually keep the student enrolled for 30 days as long as you're attempting to locate and engage the student during those 30 days. And then only after the 30 days of unexcused absences do you now have to exit them from membership. Next slide, please. I see Callista's answering some questions about competency based in in the chat. But we can come back to that if you want me to.
I think we're good.
Okay, next slide, please.
Okay.
Okay, so just the summary, kind of putting that board rule change into kind of just like layman's term. So basically, the best way to think about this is a financial benefit. So in the past, you get those 10 days of membership funding for the student who stopped showing up and you're not able to get a hold of them. But with students with disabilities, you might still be continuing to try to reach out to the student and figure out where they are, send out that ready and willing letter beyond 10 days, but without any financial compensation. So now you can get financial compensation for 30 consecutive school days of this type of outreach. And that's optional, it's not required. If you do decide to seek the funds for up to 30 days, USBE will require that the LEA document its efforts to locate and engage the student. The allowance of the additional funds is not dependent on the LEA being successful at those efforts, just that those efforts are made and documented. Next slide, please. Okay, and then another thing I haven't explicitly mentioned with that update to board rule that I realized is worth noting is that a definition for student with a disability was added to R 277-419. It wasn't previously included. And that definition includes students who are eligible for services under Utah State Code, IDEA, and Section 504. So that's worth taking a look at. Next slide, please. Okay, and so with the rule change for the 30-day rule, we are going to be adding a new Scram exit code of M. And so that's for a membership exit when a student must be exited from membership due to unexcused absences. So LEAs should use Scram exit code M in scenarios when they have a student who becomes unengaged and they need to be prepared to provide a FAPE if the student returns. And the purpose of that, two big overarching purposes. One is that we hope that it would help LEAs more easily track and identify students in this situation. And then also it will allow USBE to analyze how often this is happening, how often the students return, etc. And the timing and functionality information you need to know about Scram exit code M, it will officially be available starting in the 2024 school year. You should use it anytime a student is exited due to the consecutive days of unexcused absences rule. And that includes students who you're exiting just after 10 days. If you're choosing not to go for the full 30 days of membership, as well as the students that you claim all the way up to 30 days of membership while they have those unexcused absences. For DLM rostering, the M code will function just like the X Scram exit code, which is when students exit school. And that means that we remove the student from the DLM roster. For EdFax reporting, again, the M code will function just like the X, which when we're submitting the exiter file for EdFax, if the student has a M or an X Scram exit code, we don't report their exit status to EdFax based off of the Scram exit code. Rather, we use the high school completion status code or the exit code on the enrollment record, the S1 record. So I've had a few questions about this new M exit code, and one of them is, okay, so M is only an exit code for the Scram record. So in these cases, now we've given you this explicit code to use for these situations. What code do you use on the student record, the S1 record? And the answer is, so that is to use the exit code DO. And it says it right in the UTREC specifications, note 3 under exit code says, use DO for students in any update who were dropped from membership under the 10-day rule. and cannot be properly accounted for at the time of the update by any other exit code. Okay, and then we had some questions in the last meeting when I talked about the M code, as well as I had some email follow-ups about this. So I wanted to cover this one, which is, are there scenarios when maybe you entered the M code when you exited the student, and then something happens and you wonder if you should change the exit code? So we don't have like a written policy on changing exit codes, but the rule of thumb is always use the exit code that most accurately represents the circumstances of the student's exit code, and only update the exit code at a later point if you find out that this exit code you originally used was not the code that most accurately represented the circumstances of the student's exit, or you need to update the student's high school completion status. And here are a couple examples. So we have two students who can't be located and they're exited due to the 30-day rule. So later in the year, student 1 returns to school. In this case, don't change the M and the DO codes. The student's return to school does not change the fact of how they left, which is they had to be exited due to the 30 days of unexcused absences. And for another scenario, we have later in the year, the school finds out that the reason student 2 stopped showing up to school is because they moved out of state. So in this case, that during that 30 days of unexcused absences, which we never heard back from the student, turns out they moved out of state. So the most accurate exit code to represent the circumstances of the student's exit would be the X code on the scribe record and the TO code on the student record. And those codes are more accurate. And so, yes, you should update. And of course, there's going to be so many different scenarios where we wonder, okay, how do we apply these rules of thumb? You gotta, just kind of use some judgment and some flexibility. These, like I said, we don't have like a state policy, official board rule or policy on this, but this is the rule of thumb. Data accuracy is important, and then those high school completion statuses, how they ended up at the end of their high school career are our most critical data points. Okay, we have a new level 2 UTREX warning that was released last month, the essential elements inconsistency. And it's triggered when a student is enrolled with one or more essential elements course code, but does not have any SCRAM record for the current school year that is marked with is 1% equals yes. Next slide. So this, like I said, this was released last month. But it did have a few errors when it was released. We're hoping to have that fixed soon. In the meantime, please ignore the validation if it's triggering on students who don't have any active essential elements courses or students who exited your LEA. And if you ever have any validation errors you're unsure about, please reach out. Okay, and so students who are getting this validation, what it means is they're not getting rostered for DLM or RISE. And even though the 9th and 10th graders will still get rostered for Utah Aspire Plus, the Utah Aspire Plus test might not get included in accountability. So that's, and that applies to the, the students with active essential elements courses. So after the validation is fixed, it should be triggering on about 600 students in about 39 LEAs. And what to do if you get this warning, work with your special ed director to verify whether the student's SCRAM data is entered into your SIS correctly. The SCRAM is 1% status, and then also whether the course codes are correct. And if a different LEA is the one that holds the SCRAM record for the student, both LEAs will need to work together to verify the data accuracy. And then if the student is not a student with a significant cognitive disability, in other words, not is 1%, and they are getting the warning, then you need to review the student's IEP for appropriate course assignment.
We have a question.
So you said this warning is currently broken. When it's fixed, will you send out an email so we know that we can start trusting it? Or is it just not going to show up until it is fixed?
It is showing up right now. It's showing up on more students than it should. It's showing up on students that the essential elements course was either in a different LEA or their essential elements course was earlier in the year. They're not currently enrolled in an essential elements course. And then also students that you have who are no longer even enrolled in your LEA. We don't need you to bother fixing data for those students. When it's fixed, it just won't even show up for those students. So some of the students that you're getting it for, it could be correct right now. It just won't be correct until it's fixed for all of the students that you're getting on. So you have two choices. And yes, we can definitely email you when it's fixed. For now, you have two choices. You can either just ignore it altogether, although that has implications for these students possibly not getting rostered on DLM like they're supposed to. Or you can email me and I can give you a list of the SSIDs of the students who it would be correct for it to be triggering on. And I'm happy to do that too. So up to you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then what is appropriate course assignment? If a student's IEP says that they should be taking a general education assessment, RISE or Utah Aspire Plus, then the student should be enrolled in general education courses. Okay, and then so in response to this, we've gotten a few questions about the 1% flag, because the understanding has always kind of been that this field is used in order to indicate that these students are eligible for alternate assessments. And so especially with post-high students who aren't in a grade level that gets tested, we're getting questions from people saying, oh, I didn't know I needed to mark this student or this flag for these students. So let's spread the word. Now we want to have this field thought of as being needed for 3 scenarios. So of course, the first is to indicate that the student's eligible to participate in alternate assessments. And that actually includes assessments from preschool through grade 11. So it's really only those 12th graders that aren't taking assessments anymore. But for the 12th graders, we want to know if they're eligible for the alternate diploma. And then, of course, for all grade levels, we want to know, we need this field reported accurately in order to know that they are eligible to receive instruction through alternate academic achievement standards, i.e. the essential elements courses. Okay, I have another new Scram fatal error coming in the 2024 school year. It will be the S2629, and it's going to be a fatal error on Scram records that have a combination of the BD or SL disability type and the is 1% flag. And that's because the definition of student with a significant cognitive disability is explicitly in clashes with the definitions of the BD and the SL disability types. And if you want more information about that, I presented more information about that a few months ago, and I can share those slides again with you. So feel free to reach out. Okay, and then another new validation, phone number warning coming in 2024 school year. If the student has a Scram record, the warning is going to say that the phone number cannot be blank. And that's because phone number is used by special education to facilitate monitoring of educational services provided to children with disabilities as required by federal law. And so we need those phone numbers to come in through those Scram records, or well, through their student records for any student who has a Scram record. And so since this is the time period where registrars are registering students for the 2024 school year, we want to have you pass this information along to registrars now rather than waiting for that new validation to start triggering. Basically, the messaging that we want to use now is that phone numbers for students with disabilities are not optional. Accurate and up-to-date phone numbers are needed for meeting federal monitoring requirements. Okay, and any questions or concerns with any of my updates, if you want more information about any of these items, or if you have validations, ever have validations that you're concerned about, that maybe you think it's not triggering correctly, or you're not sure why it's triggering, always feel free to reach out.
So if a parent refuses to give us phone numbers, what do we do in that situation?
So, sorry, which numbers?
If a parent refuses to give
Oh,
the
right.
phone number, what do they do?
That's why we're making this a warning, not a fatal error, because we anticipate that you'll encounter that situation. I think you can try to reason with them, that, we as a state, we have, accountability measures to the federal government, that we're not doing well on, and we could do better on, if we were able to do better, outreach and monitoring and surveying, and phone numbers are a critical component of that. So it's not that we, it's not that we're going to sell phone numbers or anything like that. We're just trying to make sure we're meeting requirements to provide special education services. We want to make sure that we're meeting requirements to monitor and survey.
Does that answer your question? She's like, I'm going to reason with them. She looked doubtful, but that's anyway. Okay. Any other questions? Question online?
This is close, but I was just going back to a couple of things in the chat on the IB code, which was Melia's first item. So the CB exit code and IBX code are similar, but just to clear up any confusion, the CB exit code is only to be used for early grads, and the IB code is for any grad that meets that criteria. And then to follow up on a question that was asked in the room, if anyone needs the IB exit code information sooner, then it will be in the USHEC specifications. You can reach out to me because we have that now. It's just not currently in the specs.
Okay.
Okay, my next section is a review of the alternate diploma, the GA and the RA codes, high school completion status codes. We always get a lot of questions about these, and it's not super straightforward. There's a lot of moving parts with this, so it's a good one to review every once in a while. So the alternate diploma is a graduate in the four-year cohort graduation rate. It's only for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. We have requirements for it in Board Rule R277705. We have a few different resources on our special education secondary transition and graduation page. And then there's a link here to the federal graduation rate guidance. If you wanted to peruse that, it's about all of the adjusted cohort graduation rate, but it has information about the alternate diploma as well. Okay, so the GA code is the code you use for a student who has completed the state-defined alternate diploma. Again, only for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. who have earned the alternate diploma, which is standards-based and aligned with state requirements for the regular high school diploma. The alternate diploma is not a diploma based solely on meeting a student's IEP goals. And a quote from the federal guidance, IEP goals cannot serve as a proxy for determining whether a student has met a state's grade level academic content standards. The alternate diploma does not end FAPE. The GA code is not a permanent exit code. So after completing the alternate diploma, a student may continue to enroll until they age out. The RA code is for a retained senior on path to the alternate diploma. And we use the RA code, not the RT code for these retained seniors because the RA code triggers a cohort reassignment. So it's only for the students who with the most significant cognitive disabilities who are on path to the alternate diploma. And in order to submit this code through UTREX, the student must have an associated SCRAM record marked 1%. And you should only be using it while it's the student's cohort year. So the school year that you're submitting it in must be equal to the student's cohort year. It doesn't accomplish anything to submit it early prior to the cohort year, nor does it accomplish anything to submit it after the student's already been included in a cohort. So that's why we have that rule. The cohort will be reassigned to the following year. A student's cohort year can be reassigned multiple times as long as they remain eligible for reassignment or until they age out. To remain eligible for reassignment, students must continue to enroll and work toward the alternate diploma. They must be given the 1% flag and they must be given the RA code each year. Okay, so a couple pieces from the ESSA high school graduation rate non-regulatory guidance that I want to cover. A10 says that under certain circumstances, a state may count a student with the most significant cognitive disabilities who graduates with a state-defined alternate diploma in the cohort for a 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. And A19 says, provided the student remains in school working toward the state-defined alternate diploma. A state should remove the students from their original 4-year cohort and reassign the students to the 4-year cohort graduating in the year of their exit. Okay, so what those two rules mean for you basically is that you need to be careful using the RA code. Because incorrect use of it is going to have some negative implications. So first of all, from A10, it's for a student who graduates with a state-defined alternate diploma. So if a student is reported as RA and then has their cohort year reassigned, the student can only be included as a graduate in their reassigned cohort graduation rate if the high school completion status code is GA. So don't use RA if the student is on path to a regular high school diploma. And for those students, you should use the RT code. If a regular high school diploma code, GC, GM, GR, or GQ is used, the student will be treated as an other completer.
Malia,
Yes.
I have a question. I'm backing up just a little bit. This is on the GA not being a permanent exit code.
Mhm.
So the GA is a high school completion status.
Right.
And if a student, I can see where a student would be marked as a GA, if they continue being enrolled in the school district, is that anticipated that they will potentially stay with the high school completion of GA until they're marked as an AO for aged out? Or is that expected to happen within the same school year? And if that happens in the same school year, do we leave it as a GA indicating their graduation completion status or aged out that they continued on for a few months to finish out the school year?
Okay, so I think, so there's actually a really good resource on that, the transition page, that walks through a bunch of different scenarios on, we have this kid and we're debating between using the CT or the RT code, or we're debating between using GA versus AO, things like that. So ultimately I want to defer to what that says. But in the case of GA versus AO, I think in that case, you'd want to use GA, because you'd want, if the year they finally finished their alternate diploma is the last year, that's your one and only chance to make sure that their record reflects that they attained that diploma, right? The AO, if a student is in their last year that they're eligible to be enrolled, and their high school completion status code is something other than AO, it's not a problem. Where the data isn't we're not gonna run into issues with data reporting if you use GA instead of AO for those students. Now, I think the other scenario you were alluding to is maybe they're 19 when they get the GA, and then they continue to enroll when they're 20 and they're 21. It sounds like maybe you're asking, should you use the GA each of those years? And that one, I can't remember what we decided on in the guidance. So that's where I want to defer to the guidance. I'll put a link. I'll add a link to this slideshow when it gets sent out. But if you go to that transition page that I already have a link in here, you'll find it there as well. Yeah, I just don't recall off the top of my head.
He's
what
shaking his head, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next slide.
Yes, next slide, please.
Wait.
Okay, and then another thing to be careful with the RA code. So in A19, it says, provided the student remains in school working toward the state defined alternate diploma. So if you give them the RA code and then they don't come back to school the next year, that means that they're not fulfilling this part of the agreement, that they have to continue to, they have to remain in school working. If they take a year off, they haven't remained in school working toward the alternate diploma. So we can't continue to reassign the cohort year after that. So basically, if the student is reported as RA, they're expected to return to school the next year. And if the student does not return to school, the student will be identified as a dropout in their reassigned cohort year graduation rate. And then that's going to be the following year after the RA code was submitted. That doesn't mean that the student isn't eligible to RA, even if they end up being a dropout in the cohort year because they skip that year of school. It doesn't mean they can't still come back. They could come back the next year. They could still work on the GA code. They could still ultimately attain their alternate diploma. Maybe if it's in that year after they were in the 4-year cohort as a dropout, they could get included in the 5-year cohort as a graduate. It's just one of the requirements of the federal guidance, that because they didn't come to school every year until they get the GA, they're just no longer eligible to have it count as a graduate.
What's your question?
Okay, and then, okay, yeah, I guess I covered that on the side. So after the student has been included in a 4-year cohort rate, the cohort year for the graduation rate cannot be reassigned again, which means the student won't have an additional chance to count as a graduate in a 4-year cohort rate. Though the student did not meet requirements to count as a graduate in the full 4-year cohort, the student is still eligible for FAPE, and the student can still complete an alternate diploma. Depending on when they finish it, they could still count as a graduate in the 5-year cohort rate. Okay, and then just be aware of some timelines to be aware of for the GA code. So of course, at year end, try to get those GA codes submitted as accurately as possible. USBE will perform grad rate calculations based on year-end data and will publish student grad rate data in the grad rate preview report. As soon as it's available, review the grad rate preview report to ensure that students are included as graduates. If an update or correction is needed for students and for currently enrolled students, the update must be submitted via historical update request by the deadline, which is usually September 23rd for our October 1 submission. If the student is no longer enrolled, submit an S1X update record with the updated exit code and high school completion status code. The S1X record must be included in your finalized October 1 submission for it to get included in the recalculated grad rate after the October 1 data. And then RA code timeline and corrections, same thing. Submit RA codes as accurately as possible at year end. And USBE will perform cohort reassignments based on year-end data and will publish student grad rate data in the grad rate preview report. As soon as it's available, review the cohort grad rate preview report to ensure that RA students' cohort year has been reassigned as expected. If you had a student that was in your 4-year cohort and you submitted the RA code and they're still showing up in your 4-year cohort, then that means that the cohort year reassignment didn't work. So those are the ones that you need to submit an update or correction. So for currently enrolled students, again, submit it through historical update request, which hopefully your RA students are currently enrolled. And then if the student is no longer enrolled, submit an S1X record. And then same thing, it needs to be part of your October 1 submission. Okay, and then for questions about the codes in Utrex, contact me. For questions about the grad rate calculation, contact Callista. For questions about alternate diploma requirements and courses, contact Tracy Gooley or Lavinia Grippentrog.
All right. Thank you.
Everybody, I'm just gonna do a quick, lost the.
Sorry.
Just gonna do a quick review of when to use the GQ code.
We'll get that.
Okay. Okay, so first, what is the GQ code? Well, it's a graduate student or a student who graduates. That's not a graduate student. That came out wrong. But they receive a basic high school diploma, but then they also have to meet specific additional mathematic competency requirements. And when we go to the next slide, this explains, based on this piece of Utah code, what that entails. So A through E would be the type of exam that they would need to pass or receive a C grade in a concurrent enrollment mathematics course that satisfies the state's requirements. So this should only be given in those situations. Any other situation, if they graduate, I guess it would be dependent on what the situation is, but most likely GR instead of GQ. Is there any questions about that?
For students not pursuing a college degree, it seems like there were two other conditions that would apply still for a GQ for them. Are you still going to hit those, or is that not the case?
Yeah, that's still currently in the code. We just put a. Yes, so that is true that is still currently in that code that was on the previous slide, but we just pasted in the first part for the students that is on track for college. Those are the primary ways that they can meet that requirement. Kristen Campbell also, who's in teaching and learning, so when it comes to which code to use, me and David can help sort that out in most cases, but if it's like the nitty gritty of which math course counts, that type of thing, Kristen Campbell knows more about that. And I know she said that they were also currently evaluating, possibly changing that code that we displayed. So yes, is the answer to your question.
There are no more questions.
Yes, the question online with the GQ code can be used this school year. Yes, it is not new. We're just reviewing the use of it because we've seen that some LEAs had questions of when to use it, or we're coding regular graduates with GQ instead of GR, but they do have to have that additional math requirement.
So if you have any other questions, you can reach out to teaching. Okay.
Stacy asked, we have the qualifying score in our UTREX documentation. I believe, so no, I believe that needs to go to teaching and learning specifically.
That's close to.
Okay, so this is similar to the GQ code where this is not anything new. We're just reviewing it. Some questions came in recently, and Malia actually found that we hadn't talked about this since 2019. So again, this isn't a new item, but we wanted to review it because it's always good to keep up to date on things. So the topic is on how to deal with hospitalized, homebound, or institutionalized students. And the board rule for this has changed. The reference has changed since we last presented on it in 2019. But what the rule says hasn't changed. So it's in R277419-7. The two items of importance are that the LEA must have continuing enrollment measurement policy in place for attendance. And then to generate membership, they have to have 120 minutes a week with a licensed educator. So that has not changed. And then we most often see these situations with SCRAM students and YIC students. And that's what we have right now currently documented for use of these types of codes for the SCRAM and YIC students. So for SCRAM students, this is coming directly from the UTREX specifications. You can see the code options for students that might meet these particular cases. And then it says, so the environment code is the type of educational setting in which the student receives special education and related services. What has changed is the early childhood is age 3 to 5, and then students age 4 or younger in K-12 must be reported with an early childhood environment code. And that's what's on the screen. These are the early childhood codes. And then these are the SCRAM environment codes for students that are within the ages of 5 to 22. And in red, you can see the codes that would apply for homebound, hospitalized, or institutionalized. For YIC, there is the one homebound hospitalized code. Again, it's the environment code for that record in UTREX. Okay, but the question now is, well, what about students that are not Scram or YIC? So like I said, the last time we presented on it, and still currently, there is no UTREX specification for these situations when the student doesn't have an S2 or an S3 record. At the end, we're gonna ask some questions about that. In 2020, USBE created a core code for students that meet these situations, and it's called the Homebound Hospital Service Code. This is for students that the LEA is financially responsible for, so they're going to receive membership. And Kristen Campbell is the one who you would contact if you had questions on that. But this is what the codes look like. So the first code is to keep track of the student. And what it says is non-credit course for LEAs to keep track of the student receiving services in private. So typically hospital or secure institutions. Again, this is the student only, and the LEA is financially responsible for the student. Educators are the second code. And this code is for the educators who visit that student. And remember, the requirement is they have to have 120 hours or more of instruction. And so currently that's what exists. Did we have a question? Okay.
I'll just follow up on another discussion so you're aware of it. Department of Health Services.
Well, that's coming up.
I'll be quiet.
So in past meetings, again, up until now, these were the two most common scenarios. Number one, students who are transferring and the LEA will no longer be providing services. Or number two, students who are receiving educational services from the LEA while they are hospitalized, homebound, or institutionalized. So for those two scenarios, the answers were the first one, and again, that was the students transferring and the LEA is no longer providing services. It's a matter of figuring out the right exit code to use. Whichever exit code you go with, there needs to be documentation to support why you're using that code. And then we have some board rules that can help you decide that, or you can talk to one of us. The second situation, so the students are still receiving service membership from the LEA. Oops, sorry about that. The LEA should be submitting an enrollment record, and you would want to use those two core codes that we put up earlier, one for the student and one for the educator. Now, currently, this is what Aaron was going to bring up. We've run into some potential issues with how that's being reported. So we wanted to ask you for feedback. We have reached out to a couple LEAs as well to ask how they're keeping track of this, or if they're keeping track of it. So this is what we're trying to learn more about. How are LEAs reporting when a student is hospitalized or homebound and not Scram or YIC? Are you reporting this maybe in your SIS, designating that somehow, or just keeping them in regular enrollment? And so an example of this might be a student is at home, but they're receiving some type of serious medical treatment, or they had a really serious injury, but they're at home. They're not in the hospital or institutionalized.
So currently, some of the direction that we've had in the past was you keep them enrolled in your school, and most LEAs assign them to the actual courses they're taking and they're receiving instruction for. But on the attendance code, they would put whatever code was signifying hospitalized or homebound, with they're really attending school, but they're not attending school. So that's what a lot of LEAs do right now.
online, it says, we have a student homebound with cancer this year. We have kept her enrolled. She's accessing homework as she can. And another, we use different attendance code for those students, but keep them enrolled in classes.
So I actually had a question about the previous slide.
Okay.
Your answers to those two questions. For the second one, that's saying, let's use the core code from the previous slide or two. Is that what that's saying there? Because that's a non-credit course. Didn't you say?
Yes.
Okay. Because that doesn't seem like, I mean, we are giving these kids credit. They are working towards graduation. So kind of back to your feedback, when we have a student who's homebound, we're providing services for, yeah, we create a new course with the same core code for whatever. So instead of enrolling them, you know, in the class with 30 students, we just created a new course with that same core code for science or math, secondary math 1 or whatever. And they're the only students enrolled in it, but we're submitting them that way.
Okay, that's good. And Paula, when you were talking about the attendance codes, that's in the SIS stuff, right? Okay, yeah.
And just sharing now, just the last part is, DHS has a legal blockage that they're trying to figure out, but we're working. It's not an education issue, it's actually legislature said you can't provide services between, I think it's like 8 and 5 or whatever that is. They actually can't bill because of law. And so they're running into a weird situation. Special ed department, DHS is working on that. Now we'll actually probably bring that up to the legislative session next year. So clean up because of situations like what we're talking right now. They're not special ed, they're not YC, they're just, you know, they might need some support or whatever, and DHS cannot bill during those times because someone thought, well, they're in school, can't bill. But we ran into situations like where there are cases where we should be able to bill, but they can't because the law won't allow. Just be aware that there's that other situation. The education, so USBE, LEAs, we're not trying to solve this problem for them. We're just aware of it and make conversations together of what are the scenarios. It's just very well.
Maybe another comment. Comment online says typically when we know a student is institutionalized and not accessing our classes, we will unenroll and then re-enroll when they come back.
Okay, so that would be the situation of where they exit them. And I think we're trying to figure out, do we need to distinguish between, so they don't exit them, they stay enrolled. But do we need to distinguish between them being at home versus institutionalized? And that's when they're still receiving membership. So I guess we'll keep this as an ongoing thing to think about. But if you do have ways that you're tracking it, it's really helpful for us to know that. Or if you have ideas, or for that last question, if you're like, yes, we need to distinguish that, please let us know. And you can send those emails to myself or Aaron. All right, Wynn?
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about the incident discipline data that you've been submitting. So first of all, we conducted a preliminary review of the incident data that was submitted so far in UTREX on March 28th. And we sent out emails to some LEAs on the 5th of April. The idea with this review is to help LEAs to help you get your incident data reported accurately prior to the year-end UTREX data submission, which is July 7th. So almost all LEAs are expected to submit incident data. And LEAs with 0 incidents reported were flagged and sent an email. So the idea of this isn't to cause any alarm, but just to make you aware that we're not currently getting incident data, or that we're not currently getting incident data in the amount that we might expect. If that's not relevant to your LEA because you have far fewer incidents or a unique context that would put you in a situation to have less incident data or to not have any incident data for some reason, obviously that's fine. That's your context. We're just letting you know that it's not showing up on our end. That said, even some completely online schools may well have some incidents to report. So the minimum threshold is more than one incident for every 50 students. And so LEAs with an incident to student ratio greater than 1 in 50, those are the ones who received the emails recently. We'll talk about some more of these numbers as we go forward. Here's what that looked like for the current data. This is from April 24th, 23. So far, you'd submitted 79,300 incidents. You can see the ratios there and some of the other counts of LEAs with 0 incidents, and then those not meeting that minimum threshold of 1 in 50. And you can see there, you can compare them to last year's counts as well. So I get the pleasure of actually bringing data to the data conference. Kind of ironic, we haven't really looked at a whole lot of data yet, so I'm going to show you a little bit of data. I'm going to talk about why it's important to have accurate incident discipline data. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're using these data at the state level, and then I want to show some examples of data quality questions, and perhaps we'll determine together if some of these are data quality issues or if they simply accurately reflect what we're seeing happen on the ground. All right, so there are serious consequences for students if we mess this up. Could definitely lead to some poor policy decisions. We wrote a paper recently on this through the shared work that we do with the Intergenerational Poverty Commission that the state operates. When we did that, we did an extensive literature review, and one of the things that we learned was that there's a lot of really negative consequences for students who are missing days due to disciplinary action. Those who receive these disciplines, they're likely to get more disciplines in the future and miss more days. They're more likely not to graduate. They're more likely to be chronically absent. They're more likely to have encounters with the juvenile justice system. They're more likely to get poor grades, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So list your negative outcome. These things are often associated with students who are missing days due to what we think of as exclusionary discipline practices. So also having these data correct, there's a lot of policy implications. We get to ask and answer questions that we couldn't ask and answer before. We've got a few examples here. Are zero tolerance policies beneficial or harmful? To what extent are there disparities among student groups in these incidents and disciplines? And then through that, we might identify some needs for professional learning, identify areas that we need to put some extra effort into. And this can also support collaborative efforts across agencies, for example, the schools and the juvenile justice system.
We have a question. The question from online is we have new principals in 4 of our schools. Is there some training that they can do about what incidents need to be reported and the importance of submitting this data?
I don't know of any particular training about that. Besides what's available in the Utrecht specs and what we do in these. Anybody else wants?
Are you gonna answer the question? I was just gonna say, no. They're gonna get the training over to Evo.
I wasn't gonna say anything. Well, I can just tell you that, and I'll just share with you what our experience was last year as we were reviewing our data submission. Prior to year end, I looked at our data and we had 4 elementary schools that were reporting 0 incidents. And I mean, keep in mind that we had done training more than once on how to enter behavior incidents into our student information system. So I contacted these 4 schools individually and said, you're reporting 0 incidents. Is that an accurate thing? Oh, did you want me to put them in the software? Yes, please. They had written them down on a sheet of paper and they had it filed in a drawer somewhere. And so they eventually input those, and the last one was actually the 7th of July or 6th, I think it was. And she was like, well, how many do you want me to enter? And I was like, all of them? I mean, and so I think the question kind of is hitting one of the pieces that we struggled with as well. And so any thoughts that you might have on how this can be addressed that way is we take this back and we teach and train our principals, but we're not always listened to in terms of the importance of this data. And this to me just pointed out that we're still not getting the message to the end of the road in terms of the importance of this data and why you need to keep it up to date all of the time. Now, we eventually got most of it in there, I think, but that's just to let you know some of the challenges that we're facing in the districts.
That's very insightful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
I'm gonna add something and then there's an online comment. So it's not the technical site's responsibility to fix this issue, but thank you for the training the efforts doing. At the state level, there is a lot of work going on in developing, putting together the training and getting that out to the correct individuals who are, be principals, be counselors, be it administrators, all the different levels and such. So that work is going, and as Wynn is probably going to talk, I don't know if he's going to talk about it. There is legislative changes that are definitely coming or have been put in place that we're working our way through right there that will have impact. A lot of this work is actually coming down through Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman and her teams. Just be aware, there is a lot of collaboration between the school systems, courts, juvenile justice system, school resource officers, kind of those discussions, and the legislature, because school safety and security is really risen to the top of concerns online and mobile.
This is actually for me,
Okay.
I was gonna say that I know we have the USBE prevention team, and I know that they have done trainings. Their audience, I don't know who those trainings were to, but I do know that they have done training, because I think we're getting a lot of comments about how to enter the data in U-Tracks or what classifies as an incident. So I mean, that's definitely feedback we can take back to their team. And Malia in the chat, the prevention and school safety team posted a training about incident data last year. So that's what I was referring to.
It's helpful to know that folks have those questions. I'm not prepared to address those types of things in this presentation. Is there another question? No. All right, cool. Okay. You kind of give me a good segue there, Russ. Here's a few resources perhaps that maybe some of these would be worth passing along. So here's some of the ways that we're using the data that you're sharing. If you go to the main website there and go to the data and statistics page, you'll see a reporting tab. In there, you'll find an annual report that's under the schools tab in the reports. That's the annual incident and discipline data report. We've updated the metrics in that. I'm going to introduce some of those to you. I think I mentioned earlier, we recently wrote a paper. It's called The Relationship of Intergenerational Poverty and Exclusionary Discipline. Perhaps something like that would give them your folks an opportunity to read some of that literature, have it summarized to understand some of those negative consequences and why it's so important. We've gotten quite a few data requests about this that we've been fulfilling. Obviously, we're meeting federal and state requirements and special education monitoring requirements. So lots of uses for these data. So I mentioned that we've been developing some new methods. This is an ongoing thing, much like these data. Aaron mentioned how we're getting there'll be some new changes coming up in the future. It seems like a very dynamic place, incident and discipline data. And I know Malia and yourselves and lots of others have done a lot of work to bring these data up to scratch and have them be as complete as possible. And now they're in a position that we feel like we have enough data to work with. We've been trying to understand what are some ways we can look at it. So these are some of the metrics we've been using. I'm not going to go through them one by one on this page, but I'm going to show you some examples as we move forward. Here's the first group. So I know that's a lot to take in on one slide. Like I say, I'm just trying to show you some examples of how you might use these data in your context, if it's applicable to you, to look at some comparisons across student groups. Here we've compared 3 groups, students affected by intergenerational poverty, students who are acknowledged as being from low-income backgrounds, and then those who are not low-income. And I've included the formulas there at the bottom for reference. Perhaps the 2 more immediate ones to look at are the percent of incidence, which is the count of incidents divided by the group count, and the incident rate, which is the count of students divided by the group count. It gets a little tricky when you really start working with these data because students can be involved in multiple incidents, and incidents can have multiple students attached to them. So you have to be really careful with what you're counting. Are we counting incidents? Are we counting students? How are we relating those 2 things together, and what are we doing with them? So this is just a simple example of a few basic things that you might consider doing for your LEA. So from here, I'm going to kind of mix these things together where I'll show you some examples of data and talk about some of these ideas about these data quality questions. So we're going to look to see to what extent we think the data are complete. We're going to look at a few outliers, and then how consistent these data are across time. This is a first look at completeness. So this is the percent of LEAs reporting incident data from 2018 to 22. And you can see we've picked up there in 2019 and held pretty steady across, probably coming in on what's that, like 95-ish% probably. And these are incident counts across the years from 18 to 22. You can see that's the total incident count. And then the next line there is the distinct incident count. When I look at this graph, the first thing I wonder is the uptick in 22, is that telling me that there were more incidents? Or is that telling me that there were more incidents reported? You know, like to the example you gave, like did people get their data out of the drawer and put it in the system in 22?
Yes, in some cases.
All right, here's a question. I may ask you a couple questions as we look at these that I mean, sort of rhetorical and also sort of not. When I look at these next 2 slides, I'm curious about these things that appear outliers. Across the x-axis are just incident IDs. The y-axis are counts of students. So as those dots are rising, that's indicating that more students were tied to a specific incident ID. So the tallest dot there on the graph, more than 80 tells us that more than 80 students were tied to a specific incident. So, I mean, I suppose that's what could this be? Some kind of disruption some kind of disruption. In this case, it could be maybe a group of students who skipped school together and that incident was tied to all of them.
I remember looking at that one actually when it was an LEA had reported all of their truant students under one incident ID.
That's right.
It was truancy.
That's correct. Yeah, I looked that one up as well. I was curious.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, there may be questions in the future about, is that the best way to approach that? Like, was that a mistake where someone said, well, all the students who were truant that day got the same incident ID? Or were all those students skipping together? Was there a big party off campus and, you know, that got assigned a single incident? Is that the right way to do it? I don't have answers to these questions, but these are questions that I have when I look at these data. Anyway, I think that some of these the outliers appear, I mean, it seems like kind of high student counts for incident IDs. 80 seems like a lot of students in one incident, but I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I mean, perhaps that's exactly right. But then the question is, what should one do with those outliers when one's analyzing these data? And this is a big example of that. So the y-axis is the count of suspensions. The x-axis is the number of days suspended. my naive view or understanding, I mean, my only real experience with school suspensions is being suspended in the 10th grade. So I don't have a lot of other on the ground experience with that, but I think my perception is that most suspensions are probably 1 day, 1 to 3 days, probably some extreme cases, 5 to 10 days. But I'm curious about these ones once you get on the other side of 10. You know, we're getting suspensions of students for more than 20 days, more than 50 days, more than 100 days, more than 150 days. Is that student expelled? What does it mean to be suspended for 87 days? What, I don't know, I'm sure these are very unique and special cases, but then it brings up for someone looking at these data at the state level, how should I treat those outliers? These 3 slides will give you an example. This is one of those metrics that I'm suggesting that you might consider using. One of the challenges with these data when people started looking at them, I know in our agency, was they said, well, there's disparities across student groups. Some groups are getting far more incidents than others. And will folks responsible, sure, there are more students enrolled in this group than that group, so they're likely to have more incidents. The purpose of this metric is to sort of balance that out a little bit and level the playing field. So we've taken the count of lost days, divided it by the group's enrollment, and multiplied it by 100. And we're calling that the number of lost days of instruction per 100 students. So the idea is, like I said, we're kind of trying to justify that metric a little bit. So, and you can see here the various student groups. So this tells us that that all these labels didn't come through. Between IGP and not low income is low income. This shows us that students from a low income background, we're losing 10.9 days per 100 students. So that's how I read this. So if I were to, you know, based on this graph, if I were to cut this down to 45 days suspension, this is how it looks. The numbers get smaller, but the patterns hold. Same way, if I cut it down to 10, you see similar patterns. I'm sorry, we lost some of those categories there, but hopefully you get the point. The numbers go down, the patterns hold. Should those be excluded to 10 days? Should we include them all? Obviously, those outliers are going to have a big effect on some of these numbers. Look really dramatic, like Native American students, 23 lost days per 100 students. You know, all of us should be concerned with these numbers. All right, this metric is we're calling it the incident-based discipline rate. And what we're trying to do here, I would say that this is kind of I'll just say it's a bit underbaked, a bit undercooked, this metric, but it's a start, and I think we'll hopefully build on it. The sum of disciplines divided by the sum of incidents. We want to understand something about relative to the incidents, what's going on with the disciplines. And so the values aren't necessarily interpretable, but if we compare these 2 groups, low income and not low income, we can see that the students who were low income in 2018 and 2019 were receiving more disciplines per incident than their counterparts. What we don't know is what were the incidents, right? We kind of have to account for the severity of the incidents, I think, for that metric to be as valuable as it could be, but that might be a quick calculation you could make across some groups to get a basic understanding of disciplines relative to incidents. Okay, so there are 21 infraction categories. I'm using infraction and incident synonymously. Sorry about that. There are 21 of them. One of them is called other. And the idea with other is there were 20. This situation doesn't relate to any of those. So we give you another option and you can write those other things in. The figure that I'm showing you is from the annual report that I referenced earlier, the top 5 incidents: disruption, truancy, other, fighting, physical assault. So we had a close look at the other category to try to understand what people are writing in. Perhaps we need to add new incident fields if we see a lot of repetition there, right? So it seems like that in some cases that people aren't really describing the incident, but rather the discipline. So 2 days of out of school suspension wasn't really another incident infraction. It was a description of the discipline. So just a heads up to be careful on those. And then it seems like in a lot of cases, things are being misclassified. So disruption is the most frequently used infraction type. 54 times in the other category, people wrote in disruption. So just kind of a heads up to maybe make sure that you look at all the infraction types before you write one into other. You can see some of these other examples. Truancy is the second. There were nearly 1,000 times that people wrote truancy into the other category. So in order for us to, have the highest quality data, maybe that's just something to consider. All right, so I believe this is my last slide, ongoing activities and development. Just as a reminder, there's some new law enforcement fields for 2023, physical arrest flag, search and seizure flag, criminal citation and non-criminal citation flags. And then there's a write-in option for this other LEA activity. So there are some changes to the juvenile justice and school collaborative reporting requirements. And then some schools have adopted an early warning system. Make sure if you have done that, make sure your IT team is on board with how that needs to function along with your multi-tier systems of support. And then you should know also that there's ongoing talks within various teams at the USBE about revising these infraction types. Like this graph indicates, there are a few that get most of the infractions. And once you get down from here, it gets really small. People aren't using them very much. So, what infractions are we using a lot? What aren't we using enough of? How do we need to balance that out? What infraction types are we missing? How can they be as discrete as possible? One thing that we found out from the literature was that incidents that are kind of subjective in nature, so like disrespectful behavior or disruption, something that's interpreted by someone else, can be particularly harmful for students. But we can't necessarily tease that out in the infraction types that we currently have. We have a very small list of incident categories that could be thought of as subjective. All right, so I believe that's it for me. Okay. Any questions? Were there questions?
There's a couple comments.
Yeah.
Kathy, you can go ahead.
It's on.
The comments from the chat were a suggestion to remove the other category altogether. And to add vandalism as a new category.
Okay, thanks.
So those are two suggestions. And then the last note was just that there is a link provided in the chat. So for those in the room, we'll send that out of the last incident data training that was done, which was in September 2022.
Okay. I just wanted to address the difficulty of reality. At being in a charter elementary school, we have an increase of incidents the last few years, and the manpower to write everything down is really tough. And those that are doing that are having a really hard time doing that. So I hope that you'll understand that reflection. And if there's a way to give advice about that, that would be great.
I don't have any specific advice about that today, but thank you for bringing that up. It's a difficult thing about these data. I think for a lot of reasons, they're inherently challenging to work with, to document, to report. By the time we're looking at data, how much does that reflect reality? Ideally, we want data and statistics to be telling a story and showing us something that's happening in real life. It's not always that easy. So anecdotes like the one you're sharing help me write careful limitations and caveats anytime I share data with someone. So thanks for that. And to the folks asking about support for understanding how to report things, I'm sure that there'll be more work happening in the past to communicate those things out. So thanks a lot, everyone.
And you know what time?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm going to get you guys out on time, before time. Don't you worry. I am all about brevity. You are rock stars for hanging in all the way to the very end. I'm just going to give you some brief updates on the SOEP. This is not an overall training. Just to let you know, it started out with one person. We now have 6 and we're going to be adding a 7th this year. So if you're like SOEP, I can never get through, I have no idea what's going on. We have a team now. So please reach out frequently. This is the statewide online education program, often confused with the SEATS data program. What I need from you, please, is could you get out to your registrars that there is help available to them on the SOEP website? If you go on to our website, they can go right into this registrar training. It's about 11 slides long. It will take them less than 5 minutes, and there's going to be some serious help in there for them. Oops, I think I hit something at the same time. Let's go ahead and let you know, 6th grade is back. It was gone for 2 years. It is back. So the SOEP is now a 6 through 12 program, and it doesn't matter where they are. That means you're going to have elementary students in this program. We do not have details on how that's going to work. Please let your registrars know this is not a split enrollment. This is not a dual enrollment. 100% membership remains with their primary school of enrollment when they use the SOEP. So one thing that I'm getting feedback from registrars is they're adding every single course and every single teacher to their SIS, and they're dying on the vine out there. They don't need to do that. We have created generic cactus course numbers as well as generic teacher cactus numbers. Set them up once. Then they can go ahead and drop these into student schedules. It's going to be so much easier than trying to build in every single thing. Yeah, no kidding, but I'm getting feedback from big districts, large districts, that they didn't know this, and we've had this for 18 months. So that's why I'm here at the very end of the day. Okay, early graduation plans. Remember, any student in grades 6 through 8 that is taking a high school course, because yes, they can through the SOEP, unusual, but they do it. They need an early graduation plan, as well as your 9th through 12th graders that are taking excess courses. And let me tell you why that's super important. A fee is being diverted from your MSP over to this online school to pay for services, right? If they're taking excess courses, you need to get paid for that so that that diversion does not hurt as much. All right. So please help your registrars understand that that early graduation checkbox tells you Trex, hey, go check Days membership, and they can go ahead and increase Days membership to make up for those additional classes so that you are not having to pay for those through other means. It's coming through that student's MFP. Your registrars do not need to increase membership for SOEP being used as credit recovery. We're not really supposed to be used for credit recovery. We are built to be original credit, but we can't tell on our end. Right? So if a student signs up for it and it goes through the process and approved, you're paying for that, right? But we don't increase membership for credit recovery usage. Release time here in the state, you're getting paid for that, even though the student is not technically enrolled during that credit hour. So if you have a student who's taking release time and they're taking 1 excess credit, don't change membership. It's a wash. Okay, and then for 9th through 12th grade students, if you have schools in your LEAs that have fewer than 1,000 students enrolled, and that's K through 12, whatever you are, if you have 9, 10, 11, or 12th graders in there, and you have less than 1,000 enrollments, there's a legislative appropriation to pay for those. So it doesn't come from the student's MSP until that's gone. The inaugural year, they gave us less than $1 million, wasn't enough to cover anything. This year, we have nearly $4 million to pay for those course fees for students in those small schools. Okay, so that's going to give your smaller schools a lot of relief out there. What questions do you have about these brief updates? A question's coming for those online. There's someone in the back. Told you I'd be fast.
If we're enrolling students using those course codes you just gave us, the generic codes, how do we know what credit we're applying for the students?
So you're going to enter that once you receive the transcript. So think of it as a placeholder. Wait for that transcript, drop it right into their transcript. I didn't.
putting it in their schedule still under the correct course code.
That can be really helpful because some SIS systems out there build days membership based on what's in the schedule. So if you have a blank in the schedule, you're reducing your membership days automatically for some SISs out there. Okay, so use it as a placeholder, but when it comes for credit, like you don't know if this is a secondary math 1 or a PE, right?
Right.
You would put that into their permanent transcript. That still didn't answer your question. Yes, please come to me later. Yep, I've got 2 more hands up here.
So then
in
you're
person.
putting in several different records to apply to WBU, so you have if students taking 5 SOE courses, and you put 5.
Yeah. Yeah, 5 courses, 5 records, yes. And there's another one up here and Calista had some online. And I can stay after, even those online, I'm happy to answer in the chat.
Last year at year end, as we were checking our data, we found that there was a situation in the way we were reporting the data through Utrex. So we could only claim the additional membership up through what portion they had been absent in the school year. And that was because of the proration formula was being applied to membership, but not attendance. Has that been addressed in the Utrex system? I believe that you had, but I'm just wondering whether it had or not. So for example, we had to lower that percentage because if we didn't, then their number of days would exceed the number of days of membership. And that was a Utrex error. So we had to artificially lower our percentages last year.
Can someone from data take that?
Should you be doing that on SOE courses? Should. That's why we might need to talk after.
Yeah, we definitely need to talk about that because that's not. Yeah, it's the early graduation flag that's going to make that not turn into an error. Huh. Okay, let's talk about that because it shouldn't be doing that. Yeah. Okay.
Did your
Callista.
graduation mark? Yeah.
That's what they're saying, it's wrong everything.
Is your school of record field marked as no?
No, the error that it was thrown is attendance is exceeding membership. Right. And that was the error that we were getting, and that's because.
I'm wondering if the online school accidentally marked it as school of record, yes. So that they were collecting membership in both places. That's why the online schools have to say school of record no, is so that it does not mess with any of that kind of thing. So if that happens again, would you please let us know so that we can look that up?
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
If you have a specific, like, as I said here, an example level or a current one. There's a couple online. The first one from Washington District, we are receiving errors on SVP students enrolling in Utah online. From a charter school, we use the charter school LEA number. For example, 9K, and that comes back as a level 1 validation error. We use 9K as a district resident.
Okay, I want to follow up with them individually, but anyone who is in Washington School District as a Washington School District student should not be using the SOEP to take Utah online courses because they already have access to that as just a benefit of that school being in their school district. So I think either I'm misunderstanding the question or I'd like to follow them.
I think
separately.
it's more of a Utrex validation cliff question. The error is saying that the LEA number should be numerical, and because of the K, it's.
So I can answer this one. So the specs list the codes that you should use for each of the SOEP providers. For the generic cactus ID, for the Where Taught district and the Where Taught school. So let's see, so the Washington, the SOEP Washington, Utah online, their generic cactus ID 769-325. Give me a second to get to the Where Taught district. Oh. Um. No, 1 second.
That might be.
I was gonna say, could we do a private follow-up on that?
Yeah,
Okay.
or just Michelle or anyone else who has the same question. Use those specs. Control left to do a search for terms that might get you to that item, SOEP or Utah Online or where taught. Couple search terms you might try using.
Okay.
So for Nevo and Michelle in Washington, you guys can follow up with in statistics / the HX team after the meeting. We can talk about those.
And I would recommend that if anyone online has individual questions, just go ahead and email me. And if it pertains to the group at large, I can send it to Callista to send to this group.
One of the problems that we found is it's hard to find the school number. You can find the LEA number, but to find the school number that goes on along with the SOEP. So sometimes they're putting that the LEA number is 9K and they're bringing the school number is 9K. And so they don't know what the school
They don't know
number
the
is.
school
So
number.
those are hard to find.
Okay,
So
we'll
if
get that.
those can be published a little better.
Let's do that. Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Hi. Thank you.
Someone just commented those numbers are on the SSID site.
The numbers are on the SSID site. Thank you.
Done?
Yeah.
All right. Yes, if I hit. Thank you, everyone. Long day. It's 3 o'clock. Drive safe if you're driving. If you're at home, thank you for joining us. We will be sending out the recording, the meeting notes, and the slides. 1 week from today at 3 o'clock, it'll be, no. Thank you, everyone. That's Callista.